For centuries, there has been one entity that the Russian military could always rely on. A general who never knew compromise, who once broke Napoleon's will, crushed Hitler's panzer divisions, and protected the Russian Empire from every invasion. The world calls this entity by a name filled with awe: General Winter. But that was when Russia was on the defense. Now, as they are on the offensive across the killing fields of Ukraine, that loyal general has switched sides. General Winter has become the Kremlin's bitterest traitor. And the most terrifying thing isn't the minus 15 degrees Celsius cold, but how the Russian army is being executed by its own former ally in ways that Putin never imagined. Welcome to the brutal truth behind the battlefield reports in Pokrovsk. According to the latest reports from Ukraine's 7th Corps, a paradox is unfolding. In the areas north of Pokrovsk, although Russia repeatedly claims to have controlled residential areas, the reality is that their assaults are melting, literally. But the one causing the most severe damage to Russian soldiers right now isn't artillery or Ukrainian kamikaze drones. It is the bone-chilling cold. Listen to Vladimir Polevy, head of strategic communications for the 7th Corps, describe this white hell. He confirmed that Russia's offensive potential is seriously degrading. Not because they lack men, but because of a deadly combination of extreme weather and a command system that disregards human life. For Ukrainian soldiers, winter is a time to hold their ground in fortified bunkers, equipped with heaters, specialized sleeping bags, and most importantly, hot food. But for Russian soldiers on the offensive, every meter of ground gained is a step closer to a frozen grave. Imagine you are a Russian soldier in a shock unit. You have no armored vehicle support because they have stalled or run out of fuel. All you have is what you can carry on your back: a thin sleeping mat, a cheap sleeping bag, and a small gas stove that could run out of fuel at any moment. And here is the tragedy. Amidst the minus 14 degrees Celsius cold, any effort to stay warm is a death sentence. Do you want to build a fire to bring some warmth back to your numb toes? That fire will shine as bright as a beacon on a Ukrainian drone's infrared camera. The result? An explosion will end your cold forever. Without fire, you die of hypothermia. With fire, you die from ballistics. That is the choice Putin has left for his soldiers. When the ground is frozen hard as rock, you cannot dig trenches. When you cannot dig trenches, you must lie exposed on the open ground. And then, frost acts as a force multiplier for Ukraine. It doesn't just paralyze the body, it paralyzes the will. Hypothermic soldiers begin to fall into a stupor, necrotic fingers make it impossible to pull a trigger, and frozen feet make it impossible to flee. The Institute for the Study of War, ISW, has noted for several consecutive days, Russian forces continued offensive operations in the Pokrovsk direction, but made no confirmed advances. Why? Because the heroic assaults praised by Russian media are, in reality, just the staggering steps of living zombies dying from the cold before they can even see the enemy trenches. To understand how painful this betrayal is, we must look back at history. The Russians have always revered General Winter. In 1709, Sweden lost an entire empire after 16,000 soldiers froze to death before the Battle of Poltava. In 1812, Napoleon's Grande Armée disintegrated not because of Russian blades, but because of the brutal cold of the steppes. In 1941, Hitler's Operation Barbarossa bogged down at the gates of Moscow due to mud and snow. But there is one common thread in all those events. Russia was the defender on its own land, with local logistics. Now, Russia is playing the role of the invader. They are repeating the exact mistakes of Napoleon and Hitler. They are forcing their soldiers to march into a natural trap that they themselves once used to destroy their enemies. Ukraine doesn't need to do much. They just need to hold the spoon and watch the Russian army swallow its own dose of icy poison. But the Kremlin's cruelty doesn't stop there. If you think the Russian Ministry of Defense would issue high-tech thermal gear, you are dead wrong. In January 2026, strange images appeared on social media. Russian soldiers were being issued bizarre tents. These were not specialized military tents. Military experts and even the Russian soldiers themselves exclaimed in shock. They were cheap portable changing tents or mobile toilet tents commonly seen at beaches or civilian campsites. These tents are so thin that the wind can blow them away at any moment. Russia marketed them as having thermal camouflage capabilities to help soldiers hide from drones. But in reality, it's no different from a plastic bag wrapped around a cold rock. It doesn't keep you warm, it doesn't stop the forest wind, and it turns the soldier inside into a stationary target, more vulnerable than ever. That is how a military superpower cares for its soldiers, with cheap toilet tents from e-commerce sites. Now, let's talk about death without gunfire. At the Pokrovsk front, the Ukrainian military has started calling Russian soldiers by a new name, Disposables. Volodymyr Chernyak, an officer with Ukraine's Rubij Brigade, shared horrifying scenes. There are thousands of Russian soldiers pushed forward under the gun muzzles of their own blocking units. Chernyak said they have recorded cases of Russian soldiers who were only slightly wounded, injuries that would be completely survivable under normal conditions. But in the cold of Donetsk, they simply lie there and freeze to death. Why? Because Russia's medical evacuation process is almost non-existent. A wounded soldier might have to lie in a damp trench for weeks waiting for an ambulance that never comes. In sub-zero environments, blood does not clot normally. The body cannot heal itself, and hypothermia will finish them off before infection can. A report from the Center for European Policy Analysis, CEPA, points out that Russian soldiers aren't even taught basic first aid skills. They step onto the battlefield without knowing how to use pressure bandages or tourniquets correctly. And even if they did, the cheap plastic tourniquets become brittle and snap instantly in extreme cold. More than 5% of Russian soldiers who could have been saved died simply because they weren't evacuated in time. In Pokrovsk, this number is surely much higher as General Winter begins to tighten the noose. So who are the people suffering this tragedy? If you were expecting elite special forces units, you will be disappointed. Russia's most elite units were ground down in the early months of the war. Now, at Pokrovsk, Ukraine is facing an army of, quote, old men and criminals. Data from Mediazona and obituaries reveal a heartbreaking truth. The most common age of death for Russian soldiers now is between 46 and 52 years old. This is not an age to be participating in assaults through the snow. These middle-aged men often have pre-existing health issues, their joints ache in the cold, and their circulatory systems aren't strong enough to fight off hypothermia. They are not winter warriors. They are sacrificial lambs pushed into the meat grinder to buy time for a campaign that has lost its direction. And when human strength is exhausted, the cruel creativity of Russian officers takes over. Prepare yourself for this detail, as it represents the peak of disregard for humanity. Reports from the Prokhorovsky direction state that Russia has begun using soldiers as living antennas. Yes, you heard that right. A soldier is ordered to stand fixed at a high exposed point in a blizzard, carrying a communication transmission device. He must stand there, not allowed to move, not allowed to take shelter, just to act as a relay station for drones and the unit's communication systems. In cold that could kill an elephant, this soldier must turn himself into a living metal pole until his body completely freezes. That is the value of a human being in the eyes of Russian generals at Pokrovsk, a cheap antenna tripod. With all these horrors, it's no surprise that the Russian army's morale is collapsing from within. But it's not just the privates, even the officers are fleeing. In early January 2026, intelligence reports showed a wave of mass transfer requests from Russian officers at the Pokrovsk front. They would rather be disciplined, rather be demoted, than have to watch their fingers and toes fall off from necrosis in trenches full of slush. They want to go to the rear. They want to go to places with heaters, where they can keep their lives and their limbs. In response, the Russian high command threatens them with severe disciplinary measures and places them in penal units. But when death by freezing has become so obvious, those threats start to lose their effect. A warm jail cell in the rear now looks like a paradise compared to a frozen trench in Pokrovsk. Russia's failure to advance in Pokrovsk is not just a military issue, it is a biological and logistical collapse. When you cannot provide your soldiers with a decent pair of boots, a proper warming tent, or a basic medical evacuation process, then even if you have millions of troops, you only possess a mobile graveyard. General Winter has delivered his verdict. This general no longer wears a Russian uniform. He has donned the blue and yellow of Ukraine, using his cold to punish those who dared to weaponize nature without preparation. Ukraine prepared for this. They understand that to win a war in winter, you don't need to be stronger than the enemy in the number of guns. You just need to survive longer than them against the harshness of the elements. With support from the West and their own meticulous preparation, Ukraine is turning winter into a solid wall that no Russian human wave can overcome. The story at Pokrovsk is a brutal reminder that in modern warfare, technology and courage are important, but humanity and logistics are what decide who will still be standing when the ice melts. The fate of thousands of Russian soldiers being left behind in the white snow is a dark scar in world military history. And you, what do you think about Russia using soldiers as, quote, living antennas, or issuing toilet tents as warming equipment? Is it desperation, or a nature deeply rooted in the way Russia conducts war? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our most in-depth analyses of the battlefield situation. Thank you for watching, stay warm, and see you in the next